Chapter 1. The Meadow. The king told her to breathe, and Grace tried, but her lungs were doing something they'd never done before, and she was fairly certain one of them had opinions about it now. "Slower," Alfred said. He stood 3 paces away with his hands behind his back, watching her the way someone watches a science experiment they are professionally invested in but personally concerned about. Grace breathed slower. The grass beneath her boots smelled like it had a biography. She could taste the rain from 2 days ago. Something small and alive was burrowing under the soil to her left, and she could hear its heartbeat, and she wished intensely that she couldn't. "What do you notice?" he asked. "Everything," Grace said. "I notice everything. There's a rabbit 30 meters east, your guard captain ate fish for breakfast, and the wind changed direction 4 seconds ago, and I would like all of it to stop." "It won't stop." "That's the worst thing anyone has ever said to me, and I was bitten by a wolf 3 weeks ago." Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, but close enough that she clocked it. A micro-adjustment of his jaw, the kind of movement a man makes when he's suppressing something and not quite managing it. "It does get easier," he said. "When?" "Depends. For me, it was around age 4. She stared at him. He looked back at her with absolute composure. The pause held for 3 seconds. Then the corner of his mouth moved. Barely, but enough. "That's a joke," she said. "Technically." "That's the first joke you've made." "That you've noticed." Grace Cavell was a cartographer. She had spent 6 years making maps of the borderlands for the Territorial Survey, sleeping in lean-tos, triangulating elevations with a battered theodolite, cataloging landmarks with the obsessive precision of someone who believed the world made sense if you measured it properly. She was good at noticing things. It was, professionally speaking, her entire purpose. None of her professional training had prepared her for noticing everything, all the time, with no off switch. And none of it had prepared her for the Alpha King of the Blackwell Dominion making a joke so dry she'd almost missed it, which meant she'd almost certainly been missing jokes for weeks and was now retroactively embarrassed. 3 weeks ago, she had been surveying a ridge trail along the northern boundary of the Blackwell territory when a rogue wolf, fleeing from the King's border patrol, had torn through her campsite. The wolf had been panicked, cornered, and not aiming for anything in particular. Grace had been between it and the tree line. 1 bite, left forearm. The rogue had kept running. The border patrol had found her 20 minutes later, already feverish, already changing. Now she was standing in a castle meadow, learning to breathe from a man who had volunteered to train her personally, which apparently no king had done in living memory, and which his entire court found somewhere between baffling and mildly alarming. "Try again," Alfred said. "This time, don't catalog, just receive." "I'm a cartographer. Cataloging is receiving." "It isn't. Your human brain wants to sort and label every input. Your wolf doesn't label. It just knows. The rabbit is there. The wind shifted. You don't need to name it." Grace closed her eyes, tried to stop naming things. Failed immediately. Her mind offered her cirrostratus overhead, soil moisture consistent with recent drainage. The king's heartbeat is 58 beats per minute, which seems low for a man his size, and she shoved it down. Something quieter rose beneath the noise. A layer of awareness that wasn't processing, just present. The rabbit. The wind. The warmth of the ground. And then, something else. Not a thought, not a sensation. A presence. Like turning around in a room you'd believed was empty and finding someone sitting in the corner who had been there the whole time. Grace's eyes flew open. "What just happened?" Alfred asked. He'd gone still. Not human still, but a different kind of still. A focused, predatory attention that lasted 2 seconds before he smoothed it back to composure. His head had tilted fractionally to the left, the way a dog tilts at a sound it's tracking. Except he wasn't a dog. He was a king. And the tilt was gone almost before she'd registered it. "Something is in here," Grace said. "In me. Something is in me." "Your wolf." "No, I know about the wolf. The senses, the hearing, the smelling everything. But this is different. This is..." She pressed her hand to her sternum. Underneath her hand, underneath her ribs, something was looking out through her eyes. Not with her, through her. It had its own interest, its own focus. And its focus was, with a directness that Grace found extremely inconvenient, fixed on Alfred. "This is a person," she said. "There is a person in my chest." "Not a person. Your wolf." "I know what the word means, but you're not hearing me. It has opinions. It is looking at you right now, and it has an opinion about you that I did not authorize." Something happened to Alfred's face. A crack in the composure. Not the jaw thing, not the microsuppression, but a genuine fracture. A flash of something warm behind the control. His eyes went gold for a full second. Not a flash, a steady glow, as if whatever was behind his composure had leaned forward to look at whatever was behind hers. Then it was gone. He blinked, composure restored. But Grace had seen it. The moment where the king had briefly been replaced by something older and more attentive. Something that had looked at her with an interest that had nothing to do with teaching. "What was that?" she said. "What was what?" "Your eyes just... There was something looked at me. Through you." Alfred's jaw tightened. "We should continue the exercise." "That was your wolf." "We should continue the exercise." "Your wolf just looked at my wolf." "Grace." "Through your face." He exhaled. Not quite a sigh, too controlled for that, but adjacent. "Yes, Flint is aware of what's happening. He finds new wolves interesting." "Flint. My wolf. Your wolf is named Flint, and he finds me interesting. He finds the process interesting, the exercise. He tilted your head, like a dog." The silence that followed was the silence of a man who had been caught doing something his body did without his permission. And Grace realized, with a delight that cut clean through the terror of having a new consciousness in her chest, that the Alpha King was embarrassed. "It's a reflex," he said with great dignity. "A dog reflex. A wolf reflex. You tilted your head at me. Can we return to the breathing exercise?" It was not a question. Grace returned to the breathing exercise, but she was smiling. And the thing in her chest, the presence, the wolf, the unauthorized opinion haver, was warm with something that felt like recognition. Not of Alfred, of Flint. Wolf to wolf, underneath the humans, something had been noted. She tried the exercise again, dropped the cataloging, let the awareness rise. The wolf was there. She could feel it now, not as a sensation, but as a companion layer. It was interested in everything. The rabbit, the wind, the texture of the grass, the way sunlight fell on the meadow in bands. It experienced the world with a raw, delighted attentiveness that Grace, who had spent 6 years alone in the borderlands and thought she knew what paying attention meant, found humbling. It was also, she was beginning to suspect, completely insane. Because underneath the delight, underneath the sensory wonder, the wolf had exactly one fixed point. Him. The man 3 paces away. His scent, his heartbeat, the warmth of him. The wolf had been alive for 3 weeks, and it had already picked a direction, and it was not interested in discussing alternatives. "Your heartbeat changed," she said. then immediately wished she hadn't. Because that was clearly not the kind of observation he'd been asking for. Alfred's expression didn't change. His hands stayed clasped behind his back. But there, his eyes. The gold again, briefer this time. And something else. His weight shifted forward onto the balls of his feet. A micro-movement so small she would have missed it a week ago. A predator's lean. Toward her. Flint. That was Flint, leaning through Alfred's body. She was starting to read the difference. The moments where Alfred was Alfred, composed, precise, patient. And the moments where something underneath pressed against the composure, and Alfred's body did things his face wouldn't admit to. Good, he said. That's progress. He turned and walked toward the castle, and Grace stood in the meadow with her wolf, looking after him, with an attention that was entirely its own, tracking his scent in the air, and she thought, I have been a wolf for 3 weeks, and I already have a roommate who won't listen to reason. And then her left ear twitched. Not her whole head, just the ear, independently. It swiveled toward a sound in the tree line like a satellite dish finding a signal, and her right ear stayed exactly where it was. And the experience of having 2 ears doing different things simultaneously was so profoundly wrong that she said, very calmly, My ear just moved. Alfred stopped, turned back. Yes. On its own. Your ears will do that for a few weeks until you learn to manage the reflex. I have to learn to manage my ears? Among other things. Grace pressed both hands over her ears and stood in the meadow and breathed and tried to accept that she was now a person whose ears had independent agendas. The wolf, the presence, the roommate, the unauthorized opinion haver, found this deeply, unreasonably funny. The laugh arrived not as a sound, but as a warm pulse that rose from her chest and settled in her jaw. A wolf's laugh. Silent, physical, felt. And then something else. A thread of gold in her peripheral vision. Her own eye, catching the light. Changing. She didn't see it. Alfred did. For 1 second, Grace Cavill's eyes, which had been brown since birth, flickered warm hazel gold, and the wolf inside her looked out through them at the wolf inside him. And Flint, for the first time in a very long time, stirred against Alfred's composure with a force that made his hands tighten behind his back. Something happened, he said. His voice was even, his hands were not. My wolf laughed at me. His eyebrows rose a fraction. Already? Is that early? It took me until I was 4. That's the same joke. It's the same answer. It was genuinely a late start. He paused, watching her ears. One of them was still swiveling intermittently. It'll stabilize within 2 weeks. In the meantime, if it happens in public. Her left ear rotated 45 degrees toward a bird in the oak tree. Grace clapped her hand over it. I look ridiculous. You look like a newly turned wolf whose ears work better than her management of them. There's a difference. The difference is visible from how far away? Quite far. He said it with complete neutrality, but the jaw thing happened, the suppression, the almost, and Grace was smiling back at him, and the smile felt easy, and easy was not a word she'd associated with anything since the bite. That was the thing about Alfred Blackwell. He didn't make the new world smaller or simpler or less frightening. He just stood in it with her and pointed out the parts that would be fine. And the parts that would be hard. And the parts that were, if you looked at them from the right angle, actually a little funny. And he did it with a face that gave away almost nothing, and a voice that gave away exactly as much as he meant to. And the precision of the calibration was, in itself, a kind of generosity. She liked him. She had established this as a data point on the first lesson, and it had only strengthened under repeated measurement. She also had a wolf in her chest who liked Flint, which was a separate problem she was not ready to address. Felix Marsh was waiting in the corridor with a cup of tea and a face that suggested he'd been rehearsing something. How was the lesson? He asked, falling into step beside her. Felix was 22, sandy-haired, and had been assigned as Grace's palace minder on the grounds that he was, in the steward's words, enthusiastic and available. He was both. He was also wrong about roughly 4 things out of every 10, he said with absolute confidence, which Grace had learned to account for the way she accounted for magnetic declination on a survey map. My ear moved on its own, Grace said. Oh, that's normal. Well, technically, involuntary oral response usually presents around week 3, so you're a bit ahead of schedule. Some wolves find that covering their ears helps, but most of the literature suggests, Felix. Yes? Does the literature suggest anything about the wolf laughing at you? Felix blinked. Wolves don't laugh. From 3 corridors away, Grace could hear Alfred's footsteps. She could distinguish them from every other footstep in the building, a fact she was choosing not to examine. And she was almost certain she heard him make a sound. The single exhaled note that, in a man with less control, might have been laughter. She went into her quarters and sat on the bed and made a list. She was a cartographer. Cartographers made lists when they were overwhelmed. Things I can now do that I could not do 3 weeks ago. Hear heartbeats, smell breakfast choices, identify rain by taste, distinguish the king's footsteps from every other footstep in the castle, move my ears independently, unwanted, and apparently house a second consciousness who has opinions about the king that I did not request and cannot return. Things my wolf has done today. Laughed at me, stared at the king through my eyes without permission, expressed a preference for his scent that bordered on aggressive, and briefly turned my eyes gold, which I didn't even know was happening until I caught my reflection in the window and scared myself. Things Flint has done today, observed through the king's body. Tilted the king's head like a dog, denied. Leaned the king's body forward by approximately 1 inch when I got close. Possibly imagined, probably not. And tracked a fox with the full body focus of a missile guidance system while the king pretended nothing happened. Things I have lost. My apartment in Kessler. My survey equipment. The theodolite was my mother's. My friend Margot, who thinks I'm on an extended mapping expedition and has probably started to worry. My neighbor's cat, who I fed on Tuesdays. My career. My old eyes. My certainty that I knew what I was. Things I like about the king, against my better judgment. He is exactly as funny as he is patient, which is to say, very. And he doesn't announce either one. Also, he was embarrassed about the fox thing and handled it with such dignity that I liked him more, which was the opposite of the intended effect. She crossed out the last entry. Then she uncrossed it. Then she added a sub-entry. Hazel agrees. Hazel aggressively agrees. Hazel has no concept of against my better judgment. Hazel has one judgment, and it is him. She crossed that out too. It stayed crossed out for about 4 minutes before she uncrossed it again. She lay on the bed and listened to the castle breathe. Everything she owned was in an apartment she couldn't go back to. She might shift in front of a civilian and reveal the existence of werewolves to a world that wasn't ready. And the woman she'd been 3 weeks ago was gone. Not dead, just inaccessible. Like a country on the other side of a border that had closed overnight. Through 3 floors of stone, she could hear Alfred's footsteps in his study. Steady. Patient. A man pacing in a room she would never have entered if a rogue wolf hadn't bitten her on a ridge trail, and her whole life hadn't ended. And a new one hadn't begun, that she hadn't asked for, and didn't know how to want. Chapter 2. Scent. By the 4th lesson, they had settled into something Grace didn't have a word for. Not friendship, exactly. She'd never been friends with a king, and the logistics seemed complicated. But something adjacent. An ease. The kind of comfort that came from 2 people who had decided, without discussing it, that they were going to be honest with each other. The ease had survived several incidents that should have killed it. In the 2nd week, Grace had growled at a serving tray. Not intentionally, A server had approached from behind her while she was eating breakfast, and something in her chest had produced a sound that was absolutely not human and absolutely not quiet. The server had frozen. Felix had knocked over his tea. Grace had turned scarlet and said, "I'm so sorry. I don't know why Did I just growl?" "Yes," Felix had said from behind a napkin, at a breakfast tray. "Well, technically, you growled at Marcus. The tray was incidental." Grace had spent the rest of breakfast wanting to disappear into the stone floor, until she'd arrived at the meadow for her lesson and Alfred had said, without preamble, "I growled at my own reflection until I was 6. Breakfast trays are an improvement." She'd stared at him. He'd looked back with complete composure, and that had been the end of it. The embarrassment, the shame, the feeling of being fundamentally wrong in her own body. He'd handled it the way he handled everything about her new life, with honesty, a single sentence, and the unspoken message that being a wolf was occasionally ridiculous, and she was going to survive the ridiculousness. Alfred was funny. She'd established this by the second lesson, but it kept surprising her, partly because his humor was so dry it evaporated before you could be sure it had been there, and partly because nobody else in the castle seemed to know. The guards treated him like a monument. The council members she'd seen in corridors moved around him the way water moves around a large rock, respectfully, urgently, without ever stopping. Felix called him Your Majesty 17 times per hour. Grace called him Alfred because he'd told her to in the first lesson and she had no reason not to. "Today is sent," he said. They were in the east courtyard, the one with the stone benches and the old oak that dropped leaves into the fountain. Morning light slanted through the archway and caught the dust motes, and Grace could smell every single one of them. Every person has a base scent, permanent, unique. Over that, there's an emotional layer, anxiety, anger, contentment. With practice, you'll read both. That does anxiety smell like? Sharp, metallic. Grace's nose was already working. She turned toward the far wall, where a young guard was standing post. He's anxious. He's new, first castle rotation. And the cook who passed through, happy, something warm, and she stopped. Sad underneath, both at once. Alfred nodded. You'll get used to knowing things about people they haven't told you. The skill is learning which things are yours to mention and which aren't. That seems like a very important lesson you're delivering very casually. It is both of those things. She found herself smiling. This was the texture of their conversations now. He said things that were simultaneously helpful and funny and completely serious. And she received them, and neither of them made a fuss about it. Then the wind shifted, and something came through the courtyard that stopped her cold. Bread, rosemary, coffee with too much sugar, and underneath, laundry soap, the cheap kind, the kind Margot used because she said expensive soap was a scam. And Grace had never argued, because Margot was wrong about very few things, and stubborn about all of them. It wasn't Margot. It was someone in the castle kitchen using the same soap, or a similar bread recipe, or it didn't matter. The scent arrived like a hand through a closing door, and Grace's breath caught, and her eyes stung, and the wolf in her chest went very still. Not because she'd found something, but because Grace had lost something, and the wolf could feel it. Alfred noticed. She could tell because his composure shifted, not cracked, adjusted, the way you adjust your weight when someone near you stumbles. There's a scent, she said. Her voice was steady, barely. Bread and rosemary and cheap laundry soap. It smells like someone She stopped, breathed. Professional register. Engage. It smells like my friend Margot's apartment, in Kessler, which I cannot go back to because I might shift in the produce aisle and the secret of werewolf existence would be revealed to a grocer named Dennis, and I don't think any of us want that. The joke was there to carry the weight. Alfred heard both parts, the joke and the weight. "The scent memory doesn't fade," he said. Not gently, honestly, the way he handled everything. "You'll smell things that remind you of before for the rest of your life. It gets less sharp, but it doesn't stop." That's the second worst thing anyone's ever said to me. The first being, still the "it won't stop" from the meadow. "You're building a collection." His jaw did the thing, but his eyes were kind, and the kindness was real. And Grace realized that the man who made dry jokes and brought her tea was also the man who understood that she was grieving, and who didn't try to fix it, and who stood 3 paces away and let her grieve, and didn't look away. He had her practice on volunteers. The first was a pack member named Owen, who smelled, according to Grace, like pine and confidence, and he's definitely lying about how much he exercised this morning. Owen looked at Alfred. Alfred looked at the sky. "She's not wrong," Alfred said. Owen left, looking slightly betrayed. The second was the castle steward, who smelled like beeswax and mild disapproval, which Grace reported verbatim and which made Alfred's jaw do the thing for the 5th time that morning. During the steward's reading, something happened that Grace was learning to watch for. Alfred's head turned, not toward the steward, not toward her, but toward the archway, tracking something she couldn't see. His whole body changed for a second. The composed, patient teacher vanished, and something sharper took its place. Focused, predatory, utterly still. His nostrils flared. The gold bled into his eyes. Then it was gone. He blinked, turned back to her. "Where were we?" "A fox just passed through the garden," Grace said. He looked at her. "I could smell it, but I didn't." She gestured at her own body. "I didn't do the thing you just did, the thing where you turned into a completely different person for 2 seconds. I didn't turn into a different person. Your eyes went gold and you stopped looking human. That's Flint. He tracks predators in the perimeter. It's not voluntary. You turned your entire body toward a fox like a radar dish and then pretended nothing happened. I didn't pretend. You said, 'Where were we?' We were somewhere. I was asking." Grace stared at him. He stared back with absolute composure. Behind the composure, she could see, or thought she could see, or maybe it was Hazel who could see, something that looked very much like a wolf who had been caught doing something embarrassing and was handling it with the quiet dignity of a man who had been doing this for 31 years and still hadn't figured out how to stop. She filed it. She was building a second atlas now, not just the atlas of Alfred, composure, control, the managed mode to real mode spectrum, but the atlas of Flint, the lean, the tilt, the gold eye predator focus, the involuntary tracking. The 2 atlases overlaid like a topographic map in its geological survey. Same territory, different layers. Then Felix arrived to be sniffed, with the enthusiasm of a man who had never been the center of anyone's attention for this long. Well, technically, scent reading is one of the harder skills for turned wolves. Born wolves develop it instinctively, but your olfactory processing pathways are still remapping, so you might find that certain scents register as the wrong emotion. For instance, anger and citrus can present very similarly on the— "They cannot," Alfred said. "The Trask monograph has been discredited. It was peer-reviewed. It was reviewed by Trask's peers, who were also wrong." Alfred looked at Grace. "Anger is metallic. Citrus is citrus. You will not confuse them." "Good to know," Grace said. "I was worried about accusing someone of being furious when they'd just had an orange." Alfred's jaw did the thing. The micro-suppression. She was keeping a running count. Today, that was 4. "Try me," he said. She stepped closer. He didn't step back. His scent was— she'd been avoiding this. She'd been aware of it since the first lesson, a background presence she'd been filing under sensory noise, because the alternative was admitting she'd been unconsciously tracking the Alpha King's scent for 2 weeks, and that was not information she was ready to have. Now she had to face it directly. She leaned in, Just barely, just enough to catch the full register, and Hazel went berserk. Not loudly, not visibly, entirely internally. But the wolf, the unauthorized roommate who had been growing more opinionated by the day, surged toward Alfred's scent with a force that made Grace's ribs ache. If Hazel could have physically climbed out of Grace's chest and pressed her nose into the king's neck, she would have. Since she couldn't, she settled for flooding Grace's entire nervous system with a warmth so intense it felt like standing in direct sunlight. Grace held very, very still, kept her face professional, did not acknowledge the fact that her wolf was having a full sensory experience 3 inches from the king's throat. The world narrowed. Old leather. Rain on warm stone. And underneath both, something she couldn't name. Like the air before a storm. Like standing next to something powerful that hasn't decided what to do with you yet, except instead of frightening it was warm. That was the word. The most dangerous man in the kingdom smelled like warmth. Her face was very close to his neck. She could feel his pulse in the air between them. His hands were at his sides, and his fingers were curled inward, and there was a faint thread of gold at the edge of his irises. And then, a low sound in his chest. Not a growl exactly, something between a growl and a breath, involuntary, cut off almost before it started. Flint, pressing through. Responding to Hazel's surge with something that was not composure, and was not teaching, and was entirely wolf. Alfred's jaw tightened. The sound stopped. But his scent spiked warm, in a way Grace could read now. She'd been reading it all morning on Volunteers, and the word for it was want. And the most powerful man in the kingdom was 3 inches from her face, and his wolf had just made a sound, and his body was saying the thing his mouth would not. Her left ear rotated toward him, independently, tracking his heartbeat like it was the most important sound in the meadow. She stepped back, quickly, clapped her hand over the traitorous ear. "Old leather," she said, keeping her voice professional despite the fact that her ear had just pointed at the king like an accusatory finger. "Stone, and something I can't identify." Alfred looked at her hand over her ear, then at her, and his expression was doing something complex. Controlled, but not entirely. "You'll learn to manage the ear reflex. Will I also learn to manage the part where my entire body apparently has opinions about your scent?" She said it before she could stop herself. The honesty between them, the ease of it, had made her careless. She waited for the managed mode to slam shut, for the 3-pace distance to reassert itself. Instead, Alfred said, very quietly, "I hope not." The pause that followed was exactly 3 seconds long. Grace knew this because she was counting, and because his heartbeat had just done something she was going to think about for the rest of her natural life. Then Felix appeared around the corner with a fresh stack of papers, and the moment broke, and Alfred stepped back to his 3-pace distance and said, "That's enough for today," in the king's voice. Grace went inside, sat on her bed, pressed both hands over both ears. Hazel had opinions. His wolf made a sound. Did you hear that? A sound? At us? That was not teaching. That was not composure. That was Flint, and he responded, and you stepped back. I stepped back because my ear was pointing at him like a compass needle. Your ear was right. Your ear is the only honest part of this body. My ear is a reflex. Your ear is a compass, and it is pointing north, and north is him, and we stood 3 inches from his throat, and he made a sound, and you retreated. We do not retreat, Grace. We are a wolf. We are a wolf who has existed for 3 weeks and has no sense of proportion. We have excellent proportion. Our proportion is him. All of him. Immediately. Grace pulled a pillow over her head. Hazel continued from underneath the pillow. Hazel did not understand the concept of muffling. Chapter 3. The Shift. 2 days later, Alfred took her to the deep woods and told her it was time to shift. The first intentional shift is different from the involuntary one, he said. You'll be in control. Will it hurt? Yes. How much? More than the bite. Less than the worst thing you can imagine. The worst thing I can imagine is my ears moving independently for the rest of my life. He almost smiled. Not quite, but closer than she'd seen. I can't promise they won't. Grace had shifted once before. The night of the bite, when the fever peaked and her body stopped being what it had always been. She didn't remember it clearly, just fragments. Pain. The sound of her own bones. And then she was human again and shaking on a cot in the border station, and a medic was telling her she'd knocked over a supply shelf, 2 lanterns, and a stack of patrol reports, and she'd said sorry, and then she'd said sorry to the shelf. She'd apologized to a shelf. While becoming a wolf. She'd told Alfred this in the first few days, because he'd asked about the night of the bite, and he'd been quiet for a moment and then said, "What kind of shelf?" And she'd said, "A supply shelf," and he'd said, "Those are the sturdiest kind." It would have survived, and she'd laughed so hard she'd had to sit down, and that was the first time she'd laughed since the bite. That was the thing about Alfred. He didn't treat the worst night of her life like a tragedy. He didn't handle her with careful words and gentle hands. He treated it like a thing that had happened to a competent person who was going to figure it out, and in the meantime, the supply shelf was probably fine. "I'll shift first," he said. "Watch." He stepped back, rolled his shoulders, and changed, not slowly, all at once, a man becoming a wolf between breaths. He was massive. Dark fur, near black, iron gray along the back and shoulders. His eyes were the same warm amber, but the intelligence in them was different, stripped of language, sharpened to something older. He padded closer and stopped a pace away, his head level with her chest, and looked up at her. Her wolf went completely silent. Not the chattering overwhelm of a new presence learning itself, a different silence. The silence of a tuning fork finding its frequency. Grace stared at him. At the wolf that was also the man who made dry jokes and brought her tea. And something inside her that was very new and very certain said, "Oh." He shifted back, slightly out of breath, reaching for the spare shirt on a branch. She looked politely at a tree. "Your turn," he said. "What if I apologize to a tree?" "I'll tell the tree you didn't mean it." "What if I'm bad at it?" He looked at her, really looked. Not the teacher's assessment, not the king's evaluation, but the way he'd looked at her on the 3rd week when she'd asked about the 3 paces. "You won't be bad at it. Your wolf has been waiting for this." "How do you know?" Because she laughed on the first lesson. Wolves who are going to struggle don't laugh on the first lesson. Grace closed her eyes, found the wolf. The second frequency, growing louder all week. She reached for it. It reached back. Yes, now, finally. And her bones began to change. It hurt, specifically and thoroughly. Her spine lengthened. Her hands stopped being hands. Her face reshaped itself. She was aware of sound, her own breathing, doubled and strange. And then she was through. Colors muted but edges knife-sharp. Smells arriving as a complete landscape. A topographic map she could read without thinking. The ground under her paws was a living document of who had walked here, when, in what state. His scent hit her like walking into a wall of warm stone. She couldn't think in words, didn't need to. The wolf knew what it knew. The clearing was safe. The man kneeling beside her was safe. The hand on her neck was the most important thing in the world. His hand was in her fur, his palm warm against her throat. She pressed into it. Not a decision, an instinct. Her body leaning toward him the way a plant leans toward light. His fingers tightened, his breath caught. She could hear his heartbeat, not steady, not controlled, running faster than any king's heartbeat had any right to run while kneeling in leaves. She stayed in wolf form for 11 minutes. At some point she lay down beside him, her head near his knee, and he didn't move. Just sat in the leaves with his hand in her fur, and his heartbeat keeping a pace that told her everything his composure normally hid. When she shifted back, she was shaking and cold and wrapped in his coat before she had time to think about the clothing situation. The coat was heavy, wool-lined, and smelled like him, storm stone and old leather and warmth. And her wolf buried itself in that scent with a contentment that felt like arriving somewhere after a very long walk. She also, she realized, had a leaf in her mouth. She removed the leaf, looked at it, looked at Alfred. I don't remember eating a leaf. You didn't eat it. You picked it up and carried it. I think it was instinctive. I carried a leaf. For about 3 minutes, you seemed quite committed to it. What else did I do that I don't remember? He paused. The pause was slightly too long, and his scent shifted in a way that meant he was choosing between the truth and something easier. Tell me. You put your head on my knee. Grace closed her eyes. For how long? Several minutes. And then? And then you carried the leaf. She sat in the leaves with her face in her hands and the king's coat around her shoulders and felt, with absolute certainty, that this was simultaneously the most embarrassing and the most important morning of her life. She was laughing and crying at the same time, and he was beside her, not hovering, just there, present. The way he was for everything. Patient and unhurried, and exactly as close as she needed. The first time I shifted, he said after a while, I was 3. I knocked over a chair, 2 servants, and the ambassador from the Greymane territory. My mother told the ambassador it was a dog. Grace wiped her eyes. Was the ambassador convinced? The ambassador was a wolf. He was not convinced. Alfred looked at the canopy above them. My mother was not a subtle woman, but she was fast. By the time the ambassador processed what had happened, she'd already wrapped me in a tablecloth and carried me to the kitchen. I don't remember any of it. She told me the story every year on my birthday. She sounds wonderful. She was practical, which in a wolf queen is the same thing as wonderful. Grace pulled his coat tighter. It was enormous on her. The sleeves hung past her hands and the hem reached her knees, and she looked, she suspected, completely ridiculous. She also had no intention of ever taking it off. Can I tell you something? She said. You've been telling me things for 3 weeks. I haven't asked you to stop. I'm less afraid than I was. She looked at her hands. Her hands, still her hands, despite what they'd just done. When I was first bitten, I thought I'd lost myself, like the person I was had been overwritten. But it's not that. It's more. I'm more than I was. Hazel isn't replacing me. She's just another layer of the map. She paused. The wind moved through the canopy and brought with it the smell of distance, cold air, stone, and somewhere very far away, wood smoke from a village she would never walk through as a human again. But I'm also less, she said. I can't go back to Kessler. I can't see Margot. I can't do the work I spent 6 years learning to do, because I might shift in front of a civilian, and then the whole world changes for everyone, not just me. I'm more and less at the same time, and I don't know how to hold both of those things without one of them winning. Alfred was quiet for a long time. Not the composure quiet, not the managed pause. The quiet of a man who was listening to something he didn't have an answer for, and wasn't going to pretend he did. I can't tell you that gets easier, he said finally. I've never been what you are. I was born this way. I've never lost a world. But? No but. I've never lost a world. I don't know what that's like, and I won't pretend I do. He looked at her. I do know that you shifted today, and it was your choice, and you were extraordinary. And I know that the person who is more and less at the same time is sitting in my coat in a pile of leaves, and she is not broken. She's just new." Grace's throat closed. Not from sadness, from the precision of it. He hadn't fixed it. He hadn't minimized it. He'd said, "I don't know what that's like." And then he'd said, "You're not broken." And both things were true, and both things mattered, and she wanted to put her head on his shoulder and stay in this clearing until the grief became something she could carry instead of something that carried her. She didn't, but she wanted to. And Hazel, brand new and wise about exactly one thing, wanted to as well. Alfred was quiet for a moment. That's the most accurate description I've ever heard from a turned wolf. The more and less. I'm a cartographer. Accuracy is the whole point. No, he said, it's not. The accuracy isn't the point. The point is that you looked at the most disorienting experience a person can have, and your first instinct was to map it. To understand it. Most people spend months being afraid. You spent 3 weeks and then described it more clearly than wolves who've lived it their whole lives. She looked at him. He was looking at the canopy, not at her. Which she was beginning to understand was something he did when he was saying something real and didn't want to watch it land. "That's the nicest thing anyone said to me since the bite," she said. "It's not nice. It's a survey measurement." "Now you're speaking my language." "Hazel," she said a moment later. He went still. "What?" "My wolf." The name had surfaced the way instinct surfaced, not chosen, arrived. Like a landmark appearing through fog. "She's Hazel." He looked at her. The composure was still there, it was always there, but behind it something was visible. Not cracked. Shone. "Hazel," he repeated, and the way he said it, careful, quiet, like a man receiving something that mattered, made her throat ache. "What's yours called?" she asked, though she already knew. Felix had told her. "Flint." "Of course it is." She pulled his coat tighter around her shoulders. "That's the most you name I've ever heard." His jaw moved, the almost smile, closer than ever. "What does that mean?" "It means it's short and blunt and exactly right, and you wouldn't have picked anything else." What she couldn't see was Flint, deep inside Alfred's composure, hearing the name Hazel and going very still. Then thinking, with the plain, simple directness of an animal that has never learned to lie. "Oh, there you are." And then, immediately, because Flint had been denying things for 31 years and was not about to stop now. "That is not relevant. The new wolf has a name. Many wolves have names. This is not significant." And then, quieter, underneath the denial, in the register that was just Flint and just true. "Hazel. Yes, that's the one." Alfred did not address any of this. He had been not addressing Flint's commentary for weeks now. The steady undercurrent of observations he hadn't asked for, like, "She smells like growing things," and, "Her wolf laughed on the first lesson, that's rare," and, "You are standing 3 paces away and your hands are doing the thing. Stop doing the thing." He had not addressed any of it, and he was not going to start. Alfred walked her back to the castle at a pace slow enough for her shaking legs. His hand stayed at her elbow. When they reached the corridor and he stepped back, his fingers trailed along her arm, wrist to elbow to nothing. And Grace felt the absence of his touch the way she felt the absence of sound after a bell stops ringing. She went into her quarters and sat on the bed and put her face in the collar of his coat and breathed and thought, "I am in trouble." Hazel, brand new and certain of exactly one thing in her month-old existence, agreed. They were in so much trouble. Chapter 4. The Gap. A month after the bite, Grace could shift cleanly, read emotional scent at 30 paces, manage her senses without wanting to claw her ears off, and move both ears independently on purpose, which she demonstrated for Alfred on the last morning, and which made him produce a sound she had never heard from him before. It was a laugh. A real one. Short, surprised out of him, low and warm. He cut it off almost immediately, but not before she'd caught it, cataloged it, and filed it in the section of her internal atlas labeled Things About Alfred Blackwell That Nobody Else in This Castle Has Ever Seen. That atlas was getting large. Over 4 weeks it had expanded from a preliminary survey into a full topographic rendering of one man, and she knew every contour. She knew that he drank his tea without sugar but added honey when nobody was watching. She knew that he'd read every map on his study walls and could tell you who drew each one and where the cartographer had been standing. She knew that his composure, the managed mode, the king's face, was not a wall he hid behind but a weight he carried. And that the moments when he set it down, with her, only with her, in the meadow or the forest or the corridor after lessons, were the moments he was lightest. She knew that he was funny. Not performatively, dryly, precisely, the way a scalpel is sharp. He said things once, quietly, and moved on. If you missed it, he didn't repeat it.
If you caught it, he gave you the jaw thing, the almost smile, the micro-suppression, and that was the acknowledgement. She had started keeping a mental tally. A month, 50-something almost smiles, 1 laugh. She also knew, because Hazel had no filter and no shame, that she was in love with him. Hazel had been building toward this conclusion with the unstoppable certainty of a wolf who was a month old and had never learned to doubt herself. The progression had been safe, the first lesson, important, week 2, home, week 3, and finally, sometime around the ear demonstration, a feeling that wasn't a word but a complete landscape. The entire map of him, every contour she'd drawn, illuminated at once like a city seen from above at night. Grace had tried to talk Hazel out of it. Hazel had no concept of talking out of. Hazel had one direction, toward. The morning of the last day, the lesson ran long. She knew this. She knew it was dangerous to have an atlas this detailed of someone you were not supposed to be mapping. But she was a cartographer, and he kept giving her data, and some of the data was, he brought her tea on the mornings they trained outside because he'd noticed she got cold. And he'd read 3 books about turning because he wanted to understand what she was going through from the inside, not just the training side. And when she told him about her cartography, the real work, the boring work, the weeks alone in lean-tos triangulating elevations, he asked questions that proved he was listening and remembering and interested. She'd told him things she'd never told anyone, about the loneliness of survey work, how you could go weeks without hearing another voice and start treating your own thoughts as company. About her mother, who'd been a cartographer too and had died in a landslide on a mapping expedition when Grace was 19. About how she'd chosen the borderlands because it was the edge of the known world and she wanted to draw the line between here and there. He'd listened the way he did everything, completely, with his whole attention. And then he'd told her, carefully, like a man stepping onto uncertain ground, that the worst part of being king was that nobody told him the truth. That everyone performed around him, and the performance was so constant he sometimes forgot what unperformed conversation sounded like. Until recently. On the 3rd week, she'd asked him why he was standing so far away. 3 paces. Always 3 paces. Is it a teaching distance? He'd looked at her for a long moment. Then, no. What is it? He hadn't answered, but his scent had shifted, warmer, sharper, the almost lightning under the stone, and she'd understood that 3 paces was the distance between being careful and being honest, and he was standing on the careful side, and the effort was visible if you knew where to look. She knew where to look. She was a cartographer. She'd been mapping the distance between his composure and his truth for 3 weeks, and the gap was closing. They were friends. She knew this with the certainty of a survey measurement taken 3 times. They were friends in the specific, rare way that happens when 2 people are exactly themselves with each other and find that the fit is precise. The problem was that she wanted to be more than friends, and she could smell,
literally, physically smell, that he did too, and they were both pretending they couldn't. The morning of the last day, the lesson ran long. He was teaching her to track, following a scent trail through the forest, reading direction and speed from residue. She was good at it. The cartographer's mind and the wolf's senses combined into something neither could do alone. "You're faster at this than anyone I've trained," Alfred said. "You haven't trained anyone." "That's true, but I'm including hypothetical people and you're still faster." She laughed. He didn't quite smile, but his eyes did something warm. Then he said, "You're ready. I don't think you need further lessons." And the warmth went out of the morning like a lamp being covered. She heard it land. The managed mode, the king's voice, the one that kept the world at a formal distance, sliding back into place over the voice that had been making her tea and reading books about turning and telling her nobody told him the truth. "Of course," she said. "Thank you." She was fine. She was competent. She was what the training was supposed to produce. A stable, capable, newly turned wolf who could navigate pack life. This was success. Felix mentioned the protocol over dinner. Casually, the way Felix mentioned everything, as if the world were a series of footnotes he'd memorized slightly wrong. Well, technically, the king was following the high-risk stabilization protocol. The strongest wolf trains the unstable turning. Risk management. Grace felt a brief, bright sting. 1 second of, "Oh, so it was procedure." And then it passed, because she was a cartographer and she knew how to read a map. And nothing about the last month had looked like procedure. Procedure didn't bring tea. Procedure didn't read 3 books about turning. Procedure didn't laugh for the first time in 2 years because she moved her ears on purpose. The protocol wasn't the wound. The wound was the silence. The first morning without a lesson, she woke up and had nowhere to be. No meadow. No steady voice saying, "Slower, don't catalog, just receive." No 3 paces, no almost smiles to count. The structure that had held the grief back for a month was gone, and the grief walked in and sat down like it had been waiting outside the door the whole time. She made it to the kitchen, made tea, smelled the bread baking, and missed, with a force that buckled her ribs, the flat in Kessler. Margot coming through the door with soup that tasted like a chemistry experiment. The cat sitting on her survey maps, shedding on the borderlands. Everything she'd been was still out there, going on without her, and she put her head on the kitchen table and cried. Hazel didn't push, didn't pull. For the first time since she'd arrived, the wolf was quiet in a way that wasn't about Alfred. She lay down inside Grace's chest and stayed there and didn't ask for anything. The first truly gentle thing the wolf had done. There was a knock at the door at 7 in the evening. She knew who it was. His heartbeat, his scent, the way Hazel lifted her head like someone had said her name. She opened the door. Alfred was standing in the corridor with 2 cups of tea and no composure. "You weren't at dinner," he said. "How do you know that?" Felix reported. Felix reports everything. It's his only reliable skill. He held out the tea. She took it. He stood in the doorway and did not come in and did not leave. "Can I sit with you?" he asked. Not the king's voice. Not the teacher's voice. Alfred's voice. The one she'd been mapping for a month. The real one. The one that lived underneath the composure like groundwater under stone. She stepped aside. He came in. Saw the coat on her, his coat, enormous, sleeves hanging, worn like armor against a grief it couldn't actually stop. His face did something she'd never seen. Not the jaw thing, not the almost smile. Something softer and more painful. The expression of a man seeing clearly what someone else was carrying, and knowing he couldn't carry it for them. He sat on the floor. The chair had her maps. She sat on the bed. They drank tea in silence for a while. "I miss my friend Margot," Grace said. "She makes terrible soup. She uses turmeric like it's a competitive sport. I've never had the heart to tell her." She looked at the ceiling. "I can't tell her anything now." I can't even tell her why I'm gone." Alfred was quiet, listening the way he listened, completely. And the stupid thing is, I don't even miss the big things most. I miss the cat. My neighbor's cat. I fed him on Tuesdays. He sat on my maps and shed everywhere, and I pretended to be annoyed and I wasn't. And now someone else is feeding him, and he doesn't know I'm gone. Cats don't track absence. He just has a new Tuesday person and he doesn't care. Her voice cracked on the last word. She pressed her hand over her mouth. Alfred set his tea on the floor, very carefully, and reached over and pushed her hair behind her ear. The touch was not romantic, it was care. Simple, specific. The gesture of a man who had watched her learn to be a wolf for a month, and was now watching her learn to grieve, and was not going to look away from either one. But her wolf responded. A warmth that started where his fingers touched and traveled down her neck and settled in her chest. And Hazel, who had been quiet, who had been grieving alongside her, stirred with something that was not desire but recognition. The recognition that this man had seen the worst and the funniest and the saddest things about her, and he was still here, sitting on her floor, drinking tea out of a chipped cup, not fixing anything, not performing anything, just present. And through Alfred's hand, through the steady contact of his fingers against her temple, she felt Flint. Not heard, not seen, felt. A deep, warm current underneath Alfred's composure, like an underground river, and the river was saying, without words, "Stay. I will make sure he stays." He took his hand back, slowly. The absence of the touch was louder than the touch had been. "I can't bring your old life back," Alfred said. "I know that. I won't pretend I can." "I know. But you're not alone in the new one, if you want company." She looked at him, sitting on her floor. No crown, no composure, no 3 paces. Just a man with tea and a wolf named Flint who had, apparently, opinions about staying. "I want company," she said. He nodded, picked up his tea. They sat together for another hour, not talking, not needing to. 2 people in a room where someone was grieving, and neither one was pretending it was fine. When he left, he paused in the doorway. "The tea will be here tomorrow morning, if you want it." "I want it." "Then I'll bring it." In the second week of evening visits, she fell asleep. She didn't mean to. They were in her room, him on the floor with a book, her on the bed with a map, the 2 cups of tea going cold on the desk, and the grief and the new senses and the cumulative weight of 6 weeks of being someone she hadn't planned to be caught up with her all at once. Her head dropped. Her pen slipped. She listed sideways off the edge of the bed and ended up with her head on his shoulder, and she was asleep before she knew she was falling. Alfred did not move. He sat on the floor with a cartographer asleep on his shoulder and a book he was no longer reading and a wolf inside him who was doing something Alfred had never felt him do before. Flint was settled. Not pushing, not denying, not commenting. Just settled, the way an animal settles when it has found the exact right spot and has no intention of leaving it. Grace's breathing was slow. Her ear, the left one, the traitor, was tilted toward his jaw. Her hand had come to rest on his forearm, fingers loosely curled, and the warmth of her palm through his sleeve was the most specific thing he had ever felt. He sat there for an hour. He could have moved her. He could have woken her. He could have shifted her back onto the bed and left and been the king about it. He sat there for an hour and listened to her breathe and did not move. "This is not significant," Flint said, from somewhere in the vicinity of Alfred's chest. Alfred did not dignify this with a response. "We are simply providing structural support." She was falling. "We caught her. This is practical." Alfred turned a page he had not read. "The ear is doing the thing again." "I know," Alfred said very quietly, so as not to wake her. "It is pointing at us." "I know. It is my favorite thing she does." Alfred closed his eyes. The book slid to the floor.
He leaned his head back against the bed frame and sat in the dark room with a woman asleep on his shoulder and a wolf who had finally stopped pretending. And he thought, I am not going to survive this. I am going to be destroyed by a cartographer who apologizes to furniture and carries leaves and whose ear points at me like a compass. And I am going to let it happen. Grace woke an hour later. It took her 3 seconds to register where she was. The warmth, the scent, the shoulder under her cheek. And then she was very still. How long was I asleep? She said. A while. Did you? I didn't move. For a while. For a while. She lifted her head, slowly. The movement required her to turn her face past his, and for 1 second they were close enough that she could feel his breath and see the gold in his eyes, and the moment was the most charged thing that had happened since the courtyard. Not because anyone touched anyone, but because she was choosing to lift her head, and the choosing was costing her something visible. She sat up. He exhaled. Neither of them mentioned it. The tea is cold, she said. I'll bring new tea tomorrow. You don't have to. I'll bring new tea tomorrow. She looked at him. He looked at her. The 3-pace distance was gone, and neither of them had noticed it go. Okay, she said. He left. She pressed her hand against the shoulder where his warmth still was, and thought, slowly. We are doing this slowly. And her ear tilted toward the corridor where his footsteps were receding, and she did not cover it. Chapter 5. The Reason. On the 3rd week after the lessons ended, Alfred brought 1 cup of tea instead of 2. I only brought 1, he said, standing in her doorway. Yours. Where's yours? I'm not staying. She looked at him. He looked at her. He was doing the thing he did when something was costing him. The composure very much in place, and underneath it something pressing hard. That's a lie, she said. I can smell it. I know you can. That's why I'm not staying. Alfred. If I sit on your floor 1 more time and drink tea and watch you draw contour lines and listen to you talk about Margot's soup and the cat, if I do that 1 more time without telling you what Flint has been saying for 6 weeks, I am going to lose what remains of my composure, and I have very little of it left. Grace leaned against the doorframe. What has Flint been saying? Alfred looked at the ceiling, then at her. The gold was steady in his eyes. Flint has been saying, he said, with the careful precision of a man translating from a language that doesn't use words. She is ours. She has been ours since the meadow. Stop bringing tea and tell her. He paused. He's also been calling me a coward. 17 times in the past week. He's keeping count. Flint tilted your head like a dog in the first lesson. I could have told you he wasn't subtle. He tracked a fox with his entire body while I was mid-sentence. Subtlety is not his strength. Alfred's composure cracked. Not the jaw thing, an actual crack. He also, every evening when I leave your room, he says one thing. The same thing. Every time. What? You could have stayed. Alfred swallowed. He's not wrong. The corridor was quiet. Grace's heart was running in a way she could feel in her teeth. Hazel was stirring. Not frantic, not pulling, just awake. Paying very close attention. Come in, she said. If I come in. Come in, Alfred. He came in. Set the cup on her desk, next to the contour lines of the northern ridge she'd been mapping. The first real work she'd done since the bite. With the survey equipment he'd arranged the morning after she'd mentioned missing the work. He stood in the middle of her room with his hands at his sides. No composure, just him. I volunteered to train you because you apologized to a table, he said. I brought you tea because you get cold. I sat on your floor every evening for 2 weeks while you grieved because I would rather sit on your floor and say nothing
then sit in my study and be without you. None of that was protocol. None of it was obligation. It was you. It has been you since the meadow. She looked at him, the man who had sat on her floor for 8 evenings and held her grief without flinching, and never asked for anything. I know, she said. I've known. I could smell it since the courtyard. Then, because I needed a friend first. I needed someone who would sit with the grief and not try to fix it, and not make it about what they wanted. And you did that. You were that. She stepped closer. And now I need both. She put her hand on his chest, over the heartbeat that was running faster than any king's heartbeat should. She could feel Flint underneath, warm, smug, extremely vindicated by the current situation. I can't rush this, she said. I'm still new. I'm still figuring out who I am in this world. The grief isn't finished. I don't know when it will be. I know. I'm asking you to walk with me, slowly, while I figure out the map. His hand came up, slowly. His fingers touched her jaw, the same precision, the same patience he brought to everything, and his thumb traced her cheekbone, and the contact traveled through her body like a bell. I'm good at slowly, he said. You've seen my teaching pace. She laughed. And then she kissed him, not because she'd planned to, not because the moment built to it, but because he'd said the right thing. And Hazel was quiet, and Flint was quiet, and the silence between them was the silence of two things that fit. The kiss was slow, careful. She could feel the growl building in his chest, low and not quite human, and she could feel him holding it back, and she loved both things, the growl and the holding. His arm came around her waist, and the 3-pace distance that had defined a month of lessons collapsed into no distance at all, and it was simple. That was the word. After everything, the bite, the turning, the grief, the wolf, the ears, the senses, the loss of everything she'd been, the kiss was simple. 2 people who liked each other. 2 people who had been honest. 2 people choosing to find out what came next. She pulled back. His eyes were gold. His composure was a memory. Slowly, she said. Slowly, he agreed. But his hand was still on her jaw, and her hand was still on his chest, and neither of them moved. Flint, from somewhere deep inside Alfred, tender and blunt and completely done. Finally. 6 weeks. I have been waiting 6 weeks. Now, can we discuss the coat? He wants to discuss the coat, Alfred said. Grace looked at him. How do you know what I'm... Your face changes when Hazel is active. The eyes go slightly warmer. Your left ear does a thing. My ear. It tilts. Toward me. When your wolf is paying attention. Grace clapped her hand over her left ear. That is extremely personal information. I'm a wolf. I notice things. You notice my ear. I notice everything about you. I have been noticing everything about you for 6 weeks. The ear is... He stopped. The composure tried to reassemble. Failed. The ear is my favorite. Hazel, inside Grace's chest, made a sound that was not a word but a feeling. The warm, settled certainty of a wolf who had picked her direction on the first lesson and had been right about it all along. Grace left her hand on her ear for 3 more seconds. Then she lowered it. The ear tilted toward him immediately. This is going to be a problem, she said. I don't think it's a problem. You're biased. Extremely. They looked at each other. The room was small and warm, and smelled like tea and contour lines, and 2 scents tangling together. Ink and stormstone, green growth and old leather. And Grace thought, I lost my old life. I lost Margot, and the cat, and the lean-to in the borderlands. I lost the person I was. And I'm still here, and I'm still grieving.
And I'm standing in a room with a man whose wolf has been calling him a coward for 6 weeks, and my ear is pointing at him like a compass needle. And I am going to walk slowly through this new world with this person and see what we build. The best maps took years. She was in no rush. 3 months later. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Grace was at her desk in their quarters now, his coat still on the chair, her survey maps on every surface, the 2 scents so tangled into the room that visitors couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. When Felix knocked and handed her an envelope with the particular expression of a man who knew this was important and was trying very hard not to say, well, technically, about it. She looked at the handwriting and her hands stopped. Margot. Margot's handwriting. The cramped, aggressive, left-handed slant that leaned into every word like it was picking a fight with the page. Grace had seen that handwriting on grocery lists, on survey notes, on the post-it stuck to her apartment door that said, "Fed the cat, your milk is expired, you owe me a life debt." She hadn't seen it in 3 months. "Alfred," she said. He was across the room reading. He looked up, saw her face, put the book down. She opened the envelope. The letter was short. Margot didn't waste words, which was ironic given her approach to turmeric. "Grace, I don't know where you are. The territorial survey says extended remote assignment, which is the kind of thing they say when they don't know either. Your apartment is fine. I've been watering your plants. The small one died, I'm sorry. The cat is fine. He sits on your doormat on Tuesdays and looks at me like I'm doing it wrong. He's probably right. If the soup is bad there too, you're not far enough away. Come home when you can, or write again, or just be okay. Be okay wherever you are. M." Grace read it twice. The first time she laughed, the soup line, the cat on the doormat, the small plant she'd never been able to keep alive anyway. The second time, the laugh broke. Not into crying exactly, into something underneath crying, the place where grief and gratitude occupy the same space and the body doesn't know which one to express, so it does both. Come home when you can. She couldn't. Margot didn't know that. Margot was writing to the old Grace, the one who slept in lean-tos and came home to expired milk and a cat who judged her. That Grace was gone, and this Grace was sitting in a castle with wolf ears and gold eyes and a king's coat on her chair, and she could never explain any of it. And the letter was proof that she had been loved before this life, and she was loved now, and neither love replaced the other, and neither love was enough on its own, and both were true. She held the letter out to Alfred. He took it, read it. His face did the thing, not the jaw, not the almost smile. The other thing, the one she'd seen in the forest after her first shift. Something visible behind the composure. Shown on purpose. He handed the letter back. He didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. "Come home when you can" was a sentence that lived in a world where Grace could go home, and they both knew she couldn't, and the kindness of the sentence and the impossibility of the sentence existed at the same time. And Alfred Blackwell, who had never lost a world, who had told her so honestly in the forest, sat with her in the space between those two truths and didn't try to close it. Hazel was very still. Flint was very still. The room was quiet in the way that holds things together. Grace put the letter in the drawer with her survey maps. The old ones, from the borderlands, the last work she'd done as a human. The letter and the maps lived in the same drawer now, the old life and the new life, side by side, not reconciled, not resolved, just held. She looked at Alfred. He looked back. The gold was in his eyes and the warmth was in his scent, and her ear tilted toward him and she didn't cover it. "The small plant was already dying," she said. "I overwatered it." Cartographers shouldn't be trusted with plants. Margot said the same thing. She said it more aggressively. His mouth moved, the real smile, the one she was building a collection of, slowly, the way the best maps were built. One measurement at a time, over years, with steady hands.
The next morning, the east courtyard, the stone benches, the oak in full leaf. Where Alfred had once stood 3 paces away and taught a terrified cartographer to breathe, a new wolf was standing. Younger than Grace had been, recently turned, trying not to cry. Grace crouched beside her. Breathe slower. Don't catalog. Just receive. I can hear everything. I know. There's a rabbit and a guard and someone chewing. That's Felix. He's a wonderful person and an unreliable source. You'll get used to both. The new wolf laughed, wet and shaky, and Grace remembered. The meadow, the ears. The worst thing anyone has ever said to me. She looked up. Alfred was in the archway, arms crossed. 3 months of slowly. No bond, no mark. Just mornings, tea, walks, the survey work, letters that crossed a border she couldn't cross herself. The careful, daily, ordinary work of 2 people choosing each other with open eyes in a world one of them hadn't asked for and was learning, slowly, to want. Her ear tilted toward him. She didn't cover it. On the back of her chair in their quarters, his coat hung where it had hung since the day she shifted. She hadn't washed it. Hazel wouldn't let her. Flint found this acceptable.